afternoon and welcome to another edition of Quotes with Kotak. Today we have Mr. Saday Sinha who will be talking to us about the banking sector. So Saday, what is your take on financial stocks as they stand today?
See, we are positive on banking stocks with medium to long term horizon because banks are basically they benefit from the economic growth, and we are expecting say 6% kind of GDP growth going forward for next 2 years. So, we will have around 15 to 16% of credit growth for the sector as a whole. With the stable margins, there could be some negative surprises on the asset quality. We expect decent growth in terms of earnings for the banking stocks.
Now, when you say that there have been some concerns also on the on banking stocks per se, what would you say about the bank's exposure to stressed assets and the concerns that the street has regards the exposure that banks have? What would your take be?
Yeah, you are right. There are some certain concerns on the exposure to stress assets like agri exposure or iron and steel or textiles, especially for PSU banks, because if you see historically they have a higher exposure to corporate, especially mid corporates and SMEs, and these segments are facing some kind of a stress. So, going forward, there could be some impacts on credit costs for PSU banks, and that is why we are slightly cautious on PSU banks vis-a-vis private.
Now, when you say PSU versus private banks, now I ask you as a novice investor, what should I be looking at? Should I concentrate on having PSU banks in my portfolio, or should I have private banks in my portfolio? What would you recommend that I do?
Yeah, there is a clear dichotomy between private sector banks and PSU banks. First, as I said earlier, PSU historically they have higher exposure to corporates, whereas you will see private banks will have higher exposure to retail segments. So, retail segment asset quality is doing fairly okay, whereas the corporate book is seeing some kind of a stress. So, in that sense private banks are better placed. Another aspect would be on the margin front, on margins of for private sector banks is likely to be stable with some positive bias, whereas PSU banks will see some kind of a compression in the margins, because even the government of India has given some directive to the PSU banks. They have to reduce exposure to the bulk deposits, and so they have their deposit rate will not come down in near term, whereas private sector banks have a decent exposure to wholesale market, and that rate has come down almost 11.5% to less than 8.5%. So, you will see because of reduction in the bulk rates, the benefits they can always pass over to the end consumer. So, what we are saying that what is happening currently, there is some kind of change in the competitive landscape. The PSU banks are not finding enough borrowers in the wholesale market, so they are shifting their focus on the retail segment, which is seeing increased competition. So, what we believe that private sector banks will pass on the benefits to retail segment, which will come from their lower cost from the wholesale side.
Also, there's been some news about the state electricity boards or SEBs recasting their loans. How will this affect financial stocks?
Yeah, you are right. What we believe that medium in short term, the PSU banks especially, they have a high exposure to a state electricity board, and where 50% of their loans will be restructured in the sense that will get a guarantee from the state government. The yield on those bonds will be definitely lower than what they are getting. So, in that sense the impact on P&L, that is profit and loss account, they have to provide, which would impact almost 4 to 5% of their PBT. Whereas in long term definitely it is positive, because the risk of asset quality will decline, and that will definitely positive for PSU bank.
So, as a novice investor, if I was to ask you, what kind of stocks should I be look at? Should I look at having in my portfolio right now? What would you recommend? What are the stock picks you recommend?
Yeah, as I said, we are positive. We are more biased towards private sector banks, and therefore we will advise our clients to buy ICICI Bank and Jammu Kashmir Bank, and we will also advise to accumulate SDFC Bank with some decline in the prices.